So, I want you to imagine a highly exclusive, softly lit dinner party.
Okay.
Like the kind where the silverware is just uncomfortably heavy, you know?
Mhm.
And the silence in the room feels, well, expensive.
Right, yeah, like everyone is afraid to clink a glass.
Exactly. And at one end of this massive, long mahogany table sits a 20th century French philosopher of science.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. He has this magnificent, just totally untamed white beard, like the sort of beard that practically commands respect in, the vaulted halls of the Sorbonne.
Sure, the classic academic patriarch look.
Totally. And he's swirling a glass of Bordeaux, staring into the dark liquid, deeply lost in thought about the epistemological nature of a water droplet or something.
Naturally.
But here's the catch.
Okay.
Seated directly next to him, adjusting her posture under the glow of this crystal chandelier, is the single biggest pop star on the planet.
Right.
Like the absolute undisputed center of global stadium culture.
It is, it's an incredibly jarring visual, honestly.
Yeah, it really is.
Because you have the quintessential academic, right?
Mm-hmm.
A man who spent his entire life analyzing thermodynamics and the poetry of matter, sitting shoulder to shoulder with the ultimate modern pop icon.
Yeah.
Someone who's, every single heartbreak and wardrobe change is just intensely dissected by millions of people.
It is a completely absurd proposition because you've got Gaston Bachelard, the philosopher of material imagination, and you have Taylor Swift, the architect of this sprawling musical empire.
Yeah.
And they are specifically sitting down as representatives of their respective worlds. And the mission for us today, the reason we are doing this deep dive and pulling up our own chairs to this imaginary dinner table, is to see who spills their secrets first.
Yeah, and we are doing this by looking at a highly unconventional, frankly, just rebellious text that forces these two figures into conversation.
Yes.
So the book is titled The Fate of Ophelia, Bachelard meets Taylor Swift.
Quite the title.
It really is, and it functions less like a traditional academic analysis and more like a manifesto, honestly.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And it comes to us from this remarkably enigmatic author who publishes under a pseudonym.
Right. What was the translation again?
So the name is Esso, which translates from Taiwanese Mandarin to mouse-colored cat.
Mouse-colored cat. I mean, we are immediately off the beaten path here.
Oh, completely.
A pseudonymous author, a bizarre conceptual pairing, and a premise that honestly sounds like a fever dream.
Yeah.
But the core argument of this, mouse-colored cat is that global pop culture and high-minded, impenetrable academic philosophy are actually asking the exact same terrifying question.
Exactly. They are both interrogating identity, the architecture of power, the unreliability of memory.
The crushing weight of freedom.
All of it. And the author's stated goal is to just violently tear down the artificial walls we've constructed.
Right. The walls between what we deem serious intellectual thought and what we just dismiss as, mere pop phenomena.
And the author is very careful to establish the parameters of this experiment early on because they explicitly state what the book is not attempting to do.
Which is important.
Right. It is not trying to legitimize Taylor Swift by sprinkling philosophical jargon over her lyrics.
Yeah.
Nor is it trying to make Gaston Bachelard palatable to teenagers by hiding him inside the pop song.
So it's not a gimmick.
No, not at all. The author describes the project as part revision guide, part conceptual blind date, and part classroom that skipped school and never apologized for it.
I love that, a conceptual blind date.
Yeah.
Because we are taking Era 12, specifically the song The Fate of Ophelia from the era known as The Life of a Showgirl, and we are literally sending it out to dinner with Gaston Bachelard.
Exactly.
We are testing whether a 3.5-minute pop track, something you might just hear blasting from a car window at a red light, can hold its own against centuries of dense university syllabi.
And this specific blind date is actually just one chapter in a much broader, highly ambitious collection known as the Philo Swift Project.
Oh, right. There's a bunch of these.
Yeah, the author has mapped out nearly 200 of these correspondences across her entire discography.
That is wild.
It is. Pairing specific songs with thinkers ranging from, Martin Heidegger and Gilles Deleuze to Niccolo Machiavelli and Jacques Lacan.
Wow. But today, we're hyper-focusing on this single interaction, the pop star and the philosopher of water.
Right.
Now, I know what is happening in cars and kitchens right now as you listen to this. You heard the phrase Taylor Swift meets French philosophy, and an involuntary smirk just crossed your face.
It happens every time.
You couldn't help it. It sounds like a punchline.
And the author actually anticipates that exact physical reaction in the very first pages of the preface.
You know it's coming.
They absolutely know.
Okay.
The smirk is an entirely predictable reflex.
So the text just hits the smirk head on. It argues that the real question we should be asking isn't whether a pop star is capable of philosophical depth.
Right.
The real question is, why does the mere suggestion of it make us smirk?
Yes.
To answer that, we have to put the smuck itself under a microscope. We have to examine the snobbery and this invisible hierarchy of ideas that we all unconsciously participate in.
And to understand the mechanics of that smirk, we have to bring in Pierre Bourdieu.
Okay, lay it on us.
So he was a monumental French sociologist, and his 1979 book, Distinction, a social critique of the judgment of taste, basically dismantled the illusion of objective aesthetic value.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, Bourdieu argued that our definitions of high culture, so the opera, abstract expressionist paintings, dense philosophical treatises, versus mere entertainment like reality television, comic books, pop music,
Yeah.
that distinction has absolutely nothing to do with the intrinsic intellectual depth or moral superiority of the work itself.
Really?
Yeah, the distinction isn't about the art. It's about the audience.
Okay, that is fascinating. So it's about social sorting.
It is entirely about social sorting. Bourdieu introduced this concept of cultural capital.
Like financial capital.
Exactly like that.
Okay.
Just as economic capital and money dictates your purchasing power, cultural capital dictates your social status.
Oh, I see.
The elite classes accumulate tastes, preferences, and knowledge that are intentionally difficult to acquire.
Right, because you need specialized education, free time, insider knowledge, just to confidently discuss, say, a 19th century German philosopher.
Exactly. That difficulty acts as a moat. It keeps the uninitiated out.
So when we decide that a dusty, unreadable book deserves deep contemplation, and we relegate a chart-topping song to the trash bin of guilty pleasures,
Yeah.
we aren't actually making a judgment about the complexity of the human experience contained in either of those works.
No, we are not.
We are operating a mechanism designed to help the elite distinguish themselves from the masses.
Precisely. High culture is not automatically profound, and low culture is not automatically shallow.
Right. But one is guarded by university admissions and academic credentials, and the other is just freely available on a Spotify playlist.
And that's the core issue.
Yeah.
The intelligentsia views pop culture with intense suspicion, not because it lacks emotional or thematic complexity, but because it spreads too widely.
Oh.
The defining characteristic of pop music is its massive accessibility.
Yeah, if 70,000 people standing in a stadium are all screaming the lyrics to a song, and they all fundamentally understand the emotional architecture of that song.
The elite lose their monopoly on meaning.
Wow, yeah. A snob cannot use a song to prove they possess a superior, more elevated intellect if the teenager working the drive-thru at a fast food restaurant understands the exact same song just as intimately.
Ubiquity destroys the utility of art as a tool for social distinction.
Because if everyone possesses the cultural capital, it ceases to be capital.
Exactly. It experiences hyperinflation. So the smirk, that reflex we talked about,
Yeah.
it is a defense mechanism. It is the intellectual elite attempting to protect the value of their specialized knowledge by preemptively devaluing the universally understood pop artifact.
Okay, hold on, though. I have to push back a little here.
Go for it.
Are we just putting a designer label on a $20 cotton t-shirt here?
What do you mean?
Like, if we take a 3-minute pop track and we just staple Pierre Bourdieu or Gaston Bachelard to it, aren't we just artificially inflating the value of the song? Ah, I see.
We're using these dead philosophers like VIP passes to get pop music into the intellectual club. It feels like we are trying to force prestige onto something that was designed entirely for mass consumption.
That is a completely fair point. And the mouse-colored cat addresses that exact cynicism in the text.
Do they? Because it feels a bit like a stretch.
They do. If the goal of the book was to prove that Taylor Swift is secretly an academic philosopher writing disguised treatises, the project would be tedious and, in the author's words, false in the wrong way.
Right, because pop music is not academic philosophy.
Exactly. And treating it as such is a category error.
Then what is the author actually doing? If we aren't saying she's a philosopher, why force the pairing at all?
The project is really about the mechanics of translation and the concept of risk.
Risk.
Yeah. Academic philosophy is notoriously opaque, right? It hides behind dense jargon and convoluted syntax, often as a way to maintain that cultural moat we just discussed.
Totally. You need a dictionary just to read a single paragraph sometimes. Right. But pop music, conversely, demands immediate visceral clarity.
Yes, it has to hit you right away.
So translating a dense philosophical concept into a lucid, emotionally resonant, pop-friendly lyric isn't a betrayal of the philosophy.
Oh, I see.
It isn't a simplification that destroys the meaning.
There's a phenomenal line about this in the source material, actually. The author says, "To simplify is to flatten, to translate is to risk, and risk, unlike prestige, is democratic."
That's the heart of it. Admitting that there is profound philosophical weight in a highly accessible pop song requires us to abandon the idea that complexity must always be painful to consume.
Clarity is not betrayal.
Exactly.
That really reframes everything.
Yeah.
Just because a piece of art is accessible, just because it features a massive, undeniable hook and a bridge that physically compels you to jump up and down,
Yeah,
that doesn't mean it is insulated from existential dread.
not at all.
It might be wrestling with the exact same questions about mortality, perception, and human agency as a dense, unreadable text from the 1800s. It just chose a different delivery mechanism.
And this realization shifts the entire foundation of the book. We move away from the sociological judgment of the audience, the smirk, the snobbery, and we enter the theoretical inner life of the artist herself.
Right. We start looking at what is actually happening in the creator's mind.
Exactly. We begin to examine what is going on when they synthesize these massive, terrifying emotions into a 3-minute track.
And this brings us to the foreword, or, well, rather, the apocryphal foreword.
Yes, this section is wild.
It really is one of the most arresting pieces of writing in the entire text, because the author completely abandons traditional academic framing here, and they write an entirely imaginary foreword from the perspective of Taylor Swift.
It's so bold.
Yeah, and it is set at 2 a.m., a time the author describes as existing somewhere between noise and silence.
It sets such a specific mood.
It does. And while it is clearly a fictional construct, it surgically dissects the reality of how young female artists, and just young women in general, are perceived by the cultural establishment.
The fictional foreword acts as a sort of conceptual bridge. In this imagined text, Taylor reflects on the bizarre reality of her profession,
Which is what?
spending half her life trying to capture lightning in a bottle. She describes sitting on the floor in her pajamas, exhausted, trying to map out the bizarre physics of human emotion.
Like why time accelerates uncontrollably when you are falling in love.
Yes, and why it grinds to a suffocating halt the moment your heart is broken.
She is literally describing the subjective experience of time, which is a massive phenomenological puzzle.
It is, but then the text pivots to the dismissal.
Right, the way society reacts to it.
It captures that universal, deeply frustrating experience of the teenage girl having her internal reality invalidated by adults.
Yeah, the fictional Taylor writes, "For years, I was told that my feelings were too much, too loud, too frequent, too feminine."
Yeah,
She continues, "I was told that I wrote breakup songs for teenage girls, as if adolescence wasn't the time when you feel the world with the violence of a summer storm."
the violence of a summer storm. That metaphor does profound heavy lifting here.
It really does.
The author is using this fictional persona to stage a radical intervention. Society frames adolescent intensity. The weeping, the dramatic declarations, the feeling that a single text message alters the trajectory of the entire universe.
We've all been there.
Right. But society frames it as a lack of maturity. It's treated as a developmental defect that you just have to outgrow.
But the author frames that exact intensity as the raw, unfiltered foundation of genuine philosophical inquiry.
Exactly. When you are 16 and experiencing your first profound heartbreak, you aren't experiencing it as a trivial subplot in a teen movie.
No, it feels like the total collapse of reality. It is a terrifying encounter with the limits of your own agency.
It is an existential crisis in the purest sense of the term.
Yeah.
The text points out that the questions keeping a teenager awake at 3 in the morning, like, why does the memory of a scarf left in a drawer carry more psychological weight than an entire decade of childhood?
Such a good question.
Or, are we defined by the people who choose to love us, or are we defined by the people who inevitably leave us?
Wow.
These are not trivial, dramatic musings. These are the foundational questions of phenomenology and existentialism.
The fictional foreword phrases it so beautifully. It says, "It's as if the ghosts that haunt our hallways actually have university degrees."
Let's look at the mechanics of this because it's fascinating. When a teenager writes a tortured diary entry about a boy with blue eyes staring at her across a cafeteria,
Yeah.
she is actually grappling with the exact same mechanism that Jean-Paul Sartre explored in Being and Nothingness.
Wait, really? Searcher?
Yes, Sartre wrote extensively about the look or the gaze.
Okay, right. The idea that hell is other people.
Well, It is more specific than just disliking others, right?
Okay.
Sartre argued that when we are alone, we are the center of our universe. We are pure subjects.
Okay.
But the moment another person looks at us, we suddenly realize we are an object in their universe.
Oh, wow. We are reduced to a character in a story we do not control?
Exactly. That sudden, terrifying awareness of being perceived, of losing your subjectivity to the judgment of someone else, that is the foundational trauma of being a teenager.
That makes so much sense.
The teenage girl writing the breakup song is intimately acquainted with Sartre's gaze, even if she has never read a single word of French existentialism.
And she's also debating Plato,
Yes,
because when she writes, "You thought you knew me, but you only saw what you wanted to see," she is dragging the boy right into Plato's cave.
she really is.
She is accusing him of mistaking the shadows cast on the wall for the complex, three-dimensional reality of the form of the good. She is accusing him of epistemological failure.
Which is incredible.
She is signing a pact with destiny, but she is doing it using red ink and a spiral notebook.
This requires a radical reframing of how we view emotional intelligence. The author is demanding that we stop apologizing for feeling things deeply.
Seriously, if you are listening to this and you occasionally look back at your old teenage journals and you cringe at how dramatic you were, this text is asking you to stop.
Yeah, that cringe is just you internalizing the smirk we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Your adolescent intensity wasn't a weakness. It was your first, unmediated collision with the terror of existence.
To quote the text directly, your tears are ink, your doubts are philosophy, and your ability to feel everything right away and too well is perhaps your greatest power.
It is an incredibly validating argument.
It is. And the author, who is fully aware of how heavy and intense this discussion is becoming, slips this brilliant Easter egg into the very end of this fictional foreword.
Oh, right. To reward the reader who actually understands the philosophical landscape.
Yes. So the sign-off from the fictional tailor, she writes, apparently Kant loved the bridge in Cruel Summer.
That line is so funny if you know Kant.
It is a phenomenal joke because it relies on understanding the diametric opposition between Immanuel Kant and the specific song mentioned.
Right, because Kant is the philosopher of the categorical imperative.
Exactly. His entire moral philosophy is built on rigid, clockwork rationality. You must act only according to a maxim that you would wish to become a universal law.
So it is a philosophy of extreme duty, order, and just totally emotionless logic.
Yes. And Cruel Summer is a song entirely about breaking rules, sneaking around, acting selfishly, and succumbing to chaotic, localized passion.
The absolute antithesis of a universal moral law.
Completely. So the image of Immanuel Kant, literally the most rigid man in the history of German philosophy, losing his mind and screaming the bridge to Cruel Summer in the passenger seat of a car.
It completely shatters the prestige wall between academia and pop.
It perfectly encapsulates the ethos of the mouse-colored cat. It forces the academic patriarch into the chaotic, emotional reality of the pop song.
Which means we need to formally meet our other dinner guests.
Yes, guest M. Bachelard.
Because if we accept the premise that a pop song can hold its own at this table, we really need to understand the mind of the man sitting across from it. We need to dissect the specific philosophical lens being applied to Era 12.
Right. Who is Gaston Bachelard?
Who is he?
To understand his philosophy, specifically his theories on water and imagination, you really have to understand his deeply unconventional biography.
Right.
The text rightfully notes that Bachelard was France's most unlikely philosopher.
Well, when you picture a revered 20th century French philosopher, a very specific archetype comes to mind, right?
Oh, yeah.
You picture someone born into a wealthy bourgeois family in Paris, someone who attended the École Normale Supérieure alongside Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir.
Someone whose path to intellectual greatness was paved from birth.
Right. But Bachelard's reality is the absolute inversion of that archetype.
You're right, it really is. He was born in 1884 in Bar-sur-Aube, which is a small working-class commune in the Champagne region.
Okay.
His father was not a professor or a diplomat. His father was a cobbler, a shoemaker.
Wow.
So Bachelard did not grow up in intellectual salons debating aesthetics. His first real profession was working for the Postal Service.
Wait, he was a postman.
He was a rural postman. He spent his days walking for miles along dirt roads in the French countryside, physically carrying letters from one village to another.
That is amazing.
And he didn't even begin his formal higher education until he was 25 years old.
That is extremely late for that world.
Especially in the French academic system, which is notoriously rigid, highly stratified, and just obsessed with youthful prodigies. Beginning your studies at 25 is a massive anomaly.
He didn't defend his doctoral thesis until he was 36.
Right.
By the time most French intellectuals are 36, they have published multiple defining texts and secured these prestigious professorships, and Bachelard was just getting started.
The author of our source text captures the unique rhythm of his intellectual journey with this stunning metaphor.
Yeah, what was it?
They write, he arrived at thought as one arrives at a village after a long walk, breathless, amazed, and determined to stay.
That image completely shifts how you read his work.
It really does.
He wasn't handed the keys to the kingdom of philosophy. He had to walk miles through the dirt to get there.
Yeah.
And the strangest part of his biography is that when he finally did arrive, his initial focus had absolutely nothing to do with poetry, literature, or imagination.
Right. His first career, the actual foundation of his academic reputation, was in the hard sciences.
Seriously?
Yes.
Mm.
Bachelard was an epistemologist and a philosopher of science. He was a strict, unyielding rationalist.
Okay, so total opposite of what we're talking about today.
Completely. He wrote dense treatises on thermodynamics, the scientific method, and quantum physics.
Wow.
He even coined the term epistemological obstacle.
What does that mean?
He argued that scientific progress is not a smooth accumulation of facts, but a violent rupture where we must break past our own flawed, intuitive assumptions about how the universe works.
Oh, I see.
And one of the primary obstacles to scientific objectivity, according to the early Bachelard, was the human tendency to project poetic narratives onto matter.
Like what?
Like, we want fire to be passionate. We want water to be melancholic.
Right.
He spent the first half of his career telling scientists to stop thinking like poets.
That is so ironic.
I know, because then, around the age of 50, which is another impossibly late pivot, he drastically shifted his entire worldview.
Having spent decades identifying the poetic imagination as an obstacle to hard science, he suddenly became fascinated by the obstacle itself.
Yes, he pivoted to studying what he termed material imagination.
He refused to choose between the sterile laboratory of the physicist and the messy, emotional landscape of the poet.
Right. The text observes that in the morning he is a rationalist. In the evening, he is a dreamer.
He inhabited both spaces simultaneously.
And despite this bizarre, contradictory trajectory, he still ended up holding one of the most prestigious chairs at the Sorbonne.
The cobbler's son, the rural postman, standing in the most elite lecture halls in Europe, sporting this wild, patriarchal beard, utterly unclassifiable by his peers.
He refused to accept the grammar dictated by his socioeconomic background.
The universe offered him the grammar of rural manual labor, and he actively chose a completely different element.
And that concept of grammar and elements is actually the bedrock of his later philosophy.
It is.
It provides the theoretical framework for this entire deep dive. In a seminal book, Water and Dreams, Bachelard presented a thesis that sounds initially, well, quite restrictive.
He argued that we do not dream freely.
Exactly.
Which sounds almost oppressive. The imagination is supposed to be the one place where human beings are entirely unbound by the laws of physics or society, right? How can he argue that we do not dream freely?
It is a deeply structuralist view of the poetic mind. Bachelard posited that our imagination, our reveries, and our poetic impulses are heavily conditioned by the four fundamental material elements.
Fire, water, earth, and air.
Yes. These elements are not just passive backdrops. They impose their specific imagery, their specific physics, and their specific logic onto our thoughts.
Oh, I get it.
They act precisely as grammar acts upon language. You can write infinite sentences, but you must obey the structural rules of grammar to create meaning.
Matter thinks for us. It provides the scaffolding.
Exactly. Let's say you are sitting in a dark room, gazing into a blazing fireplace. The element of fire dictates a very specific type of reverie.
Right.
Fire imposes narratives of sudden consumption, intense passion, violent transformation, the reduction of matter to ash.
Phoenix-like rebirth, that kind of thing.
Yes, fire moves quickly. But if you walk outside and stare into the slow, dark current of a river,
The element of water imposes an entirely different poetic regime.
completely different.
Water demands narratives of depth. It demands reflection, the blurring of boundaries, slow erosion, and melancholy.
And the source text introduces this concept with a hypnotic little poem that perfectly captures the Bachelardian view of the aquatic regime.
Oh, I have it right here. It goes, water loosens names that are too tight. Floating is sometimes an argument. The river thinks more slowly than we do. Drowning is a liquid grammar. The mirror of ponds forgives.
Drowning is a liquid grammar. That phrase is the skeleton key to understanding Bachelard's literary critique.
Oh, so.
He demonstrated that in the history of Western art and literature, water is never an innocent setting. It is an active poetic force.
It dictates dissolution.
It invites a gentle rocking motion, a loss of earthly gravity, and ultimately disappearance.
And this leads us directly to the incredibly dark, persistent history that water has with female characters in literature.
Yeah, it's a very pronounced pattern.
Bachelard observed this pattern so frequently that he actually coined a clinical term for it,
The Ophelia complex.
named after Shakespeare's Ophelia, obviously, who, driven mad by the machinations of the men around her, falls into a brook and famously allows her heavy garments to pull her under, singing snatches of old tunes as she drowns.
But for Bachelard, the Ophelia complex is not just about one character in a Renaissance play.
No.
It is a profound psychological mapping of the human fascination with water as an invitation to let go gently.
It is the overwhelming temptation to surrender to the current.
Bachelard argues that from a poetic standpoint, Ophelia does not drown by accident. She obeys the inherent logic of the element she entered.
She obeys the water.
Yes.
The water promises her something the land cannot. The land is sharp, painful, full of betrayals and loud noises.
But the water promises silence.
It promises to blur all the sharp contours of her trauma. It cradles her in a state of weightless suspension before it finally dissolves her.
Ophelia represents a specific poetic regime. She embodies the human soul's terrifying preference for fluidity over rigid boundaries, the desire to choose peaceful erasure over the harsh, demanding reality of existing as a subject in the world.
And this concept of the Ophelia complex is explored in the source text through this brilliantly scripted dialogue.
Oh, the dinner conversation.
Yeah, it's presented as a conversation between two archetypal characters, the Swiftie and the Snob.
So well done.
The Snob is exactly who you imagine dismissive, dripping with Bordeaux's cultural capital. He rolled his eyes and says, Taylor Swift comparing herself to a Shakespearean character, humility is on sick leave.
The Snob assumes the song is an act of supreme arrogance.
Right, but the Swiftie counters with a devastatingly precise application of Bachelardian theory.
The Swiftie argues that the subject of the song is not comparing herself to Ophelia. She is actively refusing to be Ophelia.
Yes, the Fate of Ophelia is not a tribute. It is a counter-program to the entire history of Western literature's treatment of complex, delicate women.
The Swiftie really lays out the receipts here.
They do.
They point out that for centuries, women in literature and history have obediently followed this watery grammar. You have Ophelia sinking in the brook.
You have Alfred Lord Tennyson's Lady of Shalott abandoning her tower, lying down in a boat and drifting down the river to Camelot, freezing to death in the current.
And then you have the devastating real-life tragedy of Virginia Woolf, filling her coat pockets with heavy stones and walking deliberately into the River Ouse.
Western culture has an absolute obsession with the aesthetic of the beautiful drowned woman.
Water proposes dissolution as the natural destiny for delicate souls.
Yeah.
That is the script written by the element. The water invites disappearance, and the female characters, exhausted by the world, comply.
Let me channel the Snob for a moment, because, it's easy to poke holes in this if we aren't careful.
Go ahead.
Isn't the Swiftie just projecting a massive amount of academic theory onto a standard music video aesthetic?
Meaning what?
Like, pop stars use water imagery all the time. It looks dramatic on camera. A song about crying in the rain or nearly drowning in a relationship is a total pop music trope.
Sure.
Does it really have to be read as a deliberate structural rebellion against Bachelardian poetics? Aren't we over-intellectualizing a metaphor here?
Well, the Swiftie in the text anticipates that exact pushback. And the defense is rooted directly in Bachelard's own writings.
How so?
Bachelard explicitly states that the material imagination is never innocent.
Okay.
It shapes our perceptions, it conditions our narratives, it actively proposes destinies.
So the water is not a neutral stage. It is an actor with an agenda.
Precisely. If the water is an active agent, proposing a specific destiny of gentle erasure, then looking at that water and saying no, refusing to float, refusing to dissolve, is not merely a generic statement of pop feminism or a visual trope.
Oh, I see.
It becomes a structural rebellion against the very syntax of the element itself.
The Swiftie delivers this crushing line to the Snob. They say, "You do exactly what the poetics of water have done to female characters since Shakespeare. You prefer her to drift gracefully rather than decide to swim."
So good.
The argument is that the song doesn't just quote Bachelard's theories, it weaponizes them by reversing the expected regime.
Matter proposes, but poetry disposes, provided that someone refuses to float.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of the song in question. Does the subject in Era 12's The Fate of Ophelia actually successfully reject the water?
That's the million-dollar question.
How does a 3-minute pop song enact a structural rebellion against a 400-year-old literary complex?
Well, the source material introduces another layer of analysis here, utilizing the voice of a fictional academic named Professor Malloch Merriwell.
Ah, Professor Merriwell.
Yes. Merriwell steps in to correct a very common, superficial misreading of the track.
Because the surface-level feminist reading is pretty straightforward, right? She walks up to the river, realizes it wants to drown her, flips it off, turns around, and walks back to the city.
Right, a triumphant rejection of the trap.
But Merriwell argues that is entirely inaccurate to the text of the song.
Merriwell emphasizes that the subject of the song does not reject the aquatic regime from the safety of the shore. She enters the water.
The mechanism engages.
Yes. And this detail is absolutely crucial for the Bachelardian analysis to hold any weight.
Merriwell introduces a concept they call the canonical gradient.
They claim to have modeled this gradient across 10,000 literary sequences involving the Ophelia complex.
Wow.
And the standard inescapable trajectory of the watery destiny is a 3-step process.
Water, then suspension, then dissolution.
Exactly. Let's break down the mechanics of that gradient because it's important.
Right.
Step 1 is water. The entry into the element, the shock of the cold, the initial envelopment.
Right.
Step 2 is suspension. The physics of floating take over. The subject loses their connection to earthly gravity. Archimedes' principle is applied to the soul.
That is such a poetic way to say it.
Isn't it? The heavy terrestrial concerns of the world are washed away, and a trance-like lethargy sets in.
And step 3.
Step 3 is dissolution. The lungs fill, the boundaries between the body and the river blur, and the subject disappears entirely.
Water, suspension, dissolution. So charting the lyrics of The Fate of Ophelia against this gradient, what actually happens?
Well, the subject enters the water. She progresses to the phase of suspension. She is floating. The trance has taken hold.
So the mechanism of the Ophelia complex is fully activated and operating exactly as it did for Shakespeare and Tennyson.
Yes. But then, the terminal phase, the dissolution, is violently disrupted.
Merriwell uses a chillingly clinical term for this. They call it a premature extraction event.
It is a sterile term describing a highly chaotic emotional moment. The sequence is not denied. The tragic script was actively running. It is merely truncated, cut short.
Imagine sitting in a dark movie theater watching a beautifully shot, tragic film.
Right.
The heroine is slipping beneath the surface of the lake, the sad violin score is swelling, the lighting is fading to black, the audience is holding its breath.
Right, classic cinematic tragedy.
And then, violently, the film strip just snaps.
Oh!
The screen goes blindingly white, the sound cuts out, the projector was simply unplugged from the wall.
That's a great analogy.
It's not that the tragedy within the film wasn't real or inevitable, it's that you, the viewer, and the character within it were forcefully removed from the narrative before the credits could roll.
That analogy perfectly illustrates Merriwell's most profound insight regarding the nature of the rescue in this scenario.
Yeah.
In traditional fairy tales or romantic literature, a prince arrives, slays the dragon, and his pure love introduces a new, triumphant logic that entirely negates the tragedy.
Yeah, true love conquers all.
But in a Bachelardian configuration, the rescue is not romantic. It is entirely structural.
What does a structural rescue look like, though?
It means the rescuer, whether it is a lover, a friend, or a sudden surge of internal survival instinct, does not defeat the water.
Because the water cannot be defeated is a fundamental element.
Exactly. The rescuer simply interrupts the syntax of the element. They physically pull her out.
The subject is removed from the image before the image has the opportunity to close its borders around her.
This is not resistance. It is incompletion.
Yeah.
That is the defining thesis of Merriwell's analysis.
Because Bachelard taught us that these elemental grammars are immensely powerful. You cannot simply fight a river and win.
No, you can't. The only way to escape the destiny of an element without negating its absolute power is simply to leave the sentence unfinished.
Which leads us into the most psychologically unsettling section of the entire book.
Yes, this part gets dark.
Because if a character is pulled from the water just moments before dissolution, the natural human instinct is to celebrate.
Right, she survived. The tragedy was averted, It is a victory.
But the text violently rejects that celebration. It argues that this specific type of survival, a premature extraction, is actually a terrifying revelation.
And to explore why survival might be worse than tragedy, the book presents two incredibly unique pieces of writing.
Oh, yeah. The perspective of a hyper-realist character named Gaston Blunder.
And a surreal vignette titled The Unlikely Taxi Ride.
Gaston Blunder serves as this brutally unromantic, analytical voice in the room. He wants to aggressively correct the narrative of triumph.
He states, she doesn't refuse to drown. She almost does. That's the entire point.
Blunder forces the reader to look at the mechanics of the near miss.
Right. The water was exactly the same water that took Virginia Woolf.
The gravitational pull was the same. The psychological trance was identical.
Everything was perfectly in place for the sequence to complete itself. And then it just stops.
Not because the subject conquered the element, but because of arbitrary luck, because of timing. Call it a prince, Blunder says. Doesn't matter.
What terrifies Blunder is the lack of narrative closure. He attacks the reader's desperate need for a happy ending.
Yeah, he says, people love to pretend it's a happy ending. It's not. It's a cut. A scene that ends too early, and that's way more unsettling.
Why is a cut more unsettling than a happy ending?
That brings us to The Unlikely Taxi Ride, which is just a masterpiece of weird, evocative, atmospheric fiction.
It really is. The author imagines an Uber ride between Taylor and Gaston Bachelard.
Which is just such a funny visual.
It's a 4.3-kilometer journey. It is raining heavily. The driver is completely silent. The windshield wipers are dragging slowly across the glass.
The setting is deliberately claustrophobic. They are encased in this moving metal box, surrounded by the very element they are discussing.
The atmosphere is completely saturated with the Bachelardian aquatic regime.
And the dialogue in this sequence is incredibly taut.
Yeah.
Taylor stares out the window and says, I thought it was over. Bachelard, playing his role as the academic patriarch, replies, it almost was.
She says it felt calm.
And Bachelard delivers this devastating observation. That is how water speaks.
We have to unpack the mechanism of that calmness because it's key.
Let's do it.
Water does not operate like fire. It does not shout. It does not explode. It does not use aggressive violence.
Right.
As the fictional Bachelard notes in a separate letter included in the text, water does not kill. It persuades, it softens, it slows, it invites you to disappear gently.
So the profound calmness the subject felt was not peace. It was the persuasion of the element taking full hold of her consciousness.
Exactly. And the conversation in the Uber continues. Taylor says, and then it stopped.
Bachelard instantly corrects her syntax. No, it was stopped.
She says, same thing. He shakes his head. Not at all.
The linguistic distinction between the active and passive voice in that exchange is everything.
It really is. If the water simply stopped, it implies that the water changed its mind, or that the element somehow lost its lethal power.
But if it was stopped, it means the element remained fully lethal, fully operational, and an external force was violently required to break the sequence.
She looks at him and asks, so what happened? He replies, the sentence did not finish.
Trying to find some semblance of victory, she says, feels like I escaped.
And Bachelard delivers the final crushing blow. No, you were extracted.
Extracted.
Yeah.
It is a word you use for a tooth or a soldier pinned down behind enemy lines. It is clinical, forceful, and devoid of romance.
It implies zero agency on the part of the subject in that final critical moment. She was a passive object forcefully removed from a hostile environment.
And this is the dark realization that Gaston Blunder was pointing us toward. If she didn't escape by her own power, if she was merely extracted by the arbitrary luck of timing or the intervention of a third party.
The water itself never changed.
Right. The mechanism of the Ophelia complex was never dismantled.
The chilling takeaway is that the river is still there. The gravitational pull of dissolution is still there.
Blunder's warning echoes through the text. He says, because now you know, she could have drowned, and next time, no one might show up.
The element is infinitely patient. It does not age. It is just waiting for the next opportunity to complete its sentence.
It transforms a seemingly empowering pop song about surviving a dark period into this existential thriller where the monster isn't dead. It's just waiting patiently right outside the front door forever.
It is a stunningly profound existential reading of pop lyrics.
It really is.
But reaching this point in the book forces the reader to confront a massive meta question.
Which is?
Why go through this elaborate, intensely academic, highly structured exercise Why dedicate an entire book to applying the dense Bachelardian syntax of water to a single track from Era 12?
Right. What is the actual motive driving the mouse-colored cat?
We finally find the answer in the afterword.
And the afterword completely derails the book. It shifts the focus away from literary analysis, away from music, and aims directly at the terrifying future of human thought itself.
The afterword is aggressively titled Antidote to Algorithmic Inbreeding.
Wow.
Yeah, it reveals the urgent, highly contemporary mission behind the entire Philo Swift project. The author directly addresses the rapid rise and total saturation of artificial intelligence, specifically large language models or LLMs.
The author describes LLMs with a phrase that is both funny and deeply alarming. He calls them those stochastic parrots of infinity that read everything and understand nothing.
The term stochastic parrots was originally coined by researchers in the field of AI ethics.
Okay, what does it mean?
It describes the fundamental mechanism of how these models operate. They are not thinking machines, they are probability engines.
Right.
They are essentially a massively scaled-up version of the autocomplete on your phone. They predict the next most mathematically likely word based on petabytes of training data.
Mimicking human language with terrifying accuracy without possessing a single ounce of actual comprehension or internal meaning.
They have ingested the entire sum of human knowledge on the internet, but they don't actually know anything. They don't feel the water.
And the author points out a massive looming danger regarding how these systems are evolving. He uses an analogy from the dawn of digital media.
Yeah.
When digital image processing first started in the 1980s, the massive selling point was zero generation loss.
Yeah.
You could make a digital copy of a copy of a copy millions of times, and the pixels would stay perfectly crisp. It wouldn't degrade like a VHS tape.
But with generative AI, the author argues, we are facing an entirely new, catastrophic kind of loss.
We aren't seeing a degradation of the visual signal. We are experiencing a catastrophic degradation of meaning,
As the author states, the more we generate, the less we create.
which leads to a horrifying technological phenomenon that the author terms digital autophagy.
Autophagy is a biological term. It literally means self-eating. The system is devouring its own tail.
The mechanics of digital autophagy are simple but devastating, right?
They are. AI generates text, images, and code at an unimaginable scale. That generated content floods the internet. Then, the developers build the next generation of AI models.
But what do they train those new models on?
They scrape the internet, which means the new AI is training on the output of the old AI. It forms a closed, recursive loop.
And what happens to human thought when it gets trapped inside a recursive mathematical loop?
It becomes perfectly smooth. All the weird, jagged, unpredictable, highly specific edges of human creativity get sanded down.
Thought becomes mathematically average, predictably safe, and profoundly conformist. The culture flattens into a gray paste of algorithmic probability.
So what is the countermeasure? How does a human being operate in a world defined by digital autophagy?
The author introduces a concept borrowed from another one of their fictional texts, a book cheekily titled Taylor Shrugged.
The concept is called capacitivism.
The core tenet of capacitivism is crucial. The goal is not to reject the AI.
Right. You cannot uninvent the digital photocopy. Retreating to the woods and smashing the server's Luddism is a failed strategy.
Instead, the goal of capacitivism is to overload the machine.
We must aggressively introduce friction into the circuit. We must generate sparks of illogical meaning that the predictive system cannot possibly anticipate.
And this is the true hidden purpose of pairing Taylor Swift with Gaston Bachelard.
Yes, it is not just literary criticism. It is a deliberate act of intellectual vandalism.
Intellectual vandalism is the perfect descriptor.
It really is. An AI can organize data flawlessly. It can summarize Bachelard's Water and Dreams in 2 seconds. It can generate a perfectly average, stylistically generic article about Taylor Swift's discography.
But an AI cannot dare.
It lacks the capacity for the absurd. It cannot make the illogical lateral leap that creates entirely new meaning out of disparate parts.
There is absolutely no training data in the AI's vast library that connects the hyperspecific emotional resonance of a pop star's red scarf to Martin Heidegger's theories of being.
There is no probability matrix that predicts putting Gilles Deleuze in lipstick.
Or strapping Niccolo Machiavelli into the passenger seat of a getaway car.
By forcing these bizarre, unprecedented, highly conceptual pairings, human beings act as what the author terms data sovereigns.
We force the predictive machine off the smooth, mathematically average highway of thought and drag it onto weird, unmapped, unlit side roads where its probability matrices completely fail.
The citizen of tomorrow won't just be someone who passively consumes the personalized flow of algorithmic data fed to them through a screen.
No, the true citizen will be the one who actively bends that flow. Sovereignty in the 21st century is no longer about simply owning information. It is about deliberately disturbing the logic of the system that processes it.
The algorithm alone, left to its own recursive loops, would never have dared to assemble the text we are discussing today. It required a flawed, irrational human mind to force the connection.
Or, as the author playfully signs off, maybe a human cat.
The mouse-colored cat has purposefully entered the machine to chew on the wires.
It is a stunning justification for the entire project. It elevates this book from what could have been a quirky, niche piece of academic fan service into a vital defense mechanism for the survival of human creativity in the digital age.
It forces us to entirely reconsider how we listen to a pop song, how we read a dense philosophical text, and most importantly, how we interact with the technological systems that are rapidly beginning to mediate our reality.
We have covered massive ground today. We dismantled our own internalized snobbery using Bourdieu's cultural capital.
We walked with Bachelard from the rural postal roads to the Sorbonne to understand how matter dictates our imagination.
We analyzed the terrifying, incomplete survival of the Ophelia complex, and we realized that this entire exercise is a blueprint for intellectual vandalism against the encroaching algorithmic grayness.
It is a profound mandate to keep thought weird, jagged, and unpredictable.
Which leaves me with a final, lingering thought. A puzzle I want you to carry with you today as you interact with your screens and your playlists.
Yeah.
We have established that our ultimate defense against the self-eating loop of AI is friction. We throw bizarre, unpredictable pairings Deleuze in lipstick, Bachelard in an Uber into the machine to break its predictive patterns.
We rely on the shock of the conceptual anomaly.
But here's the terrifying paradox of that strategy. What happens when the machine inevitably digests the vandalism?
It models the friction.
Exactly. AI's sole function is to learn patterns. Once this book is digitized, once the algorithm ingests the file of Swift project, it learns to expect Bachelard in an Uber.
It maps the connection between Heidegger and Red Scarf.
The anomaly is categorized. The friction becomes a mathematical parameter. The system absorbs the shock, and the bizarre suddenly becomes the new average.
The machine expands to encompass the vandalism.
So the real question is, if the algorithm inevitably learns to predict our rebellion, what entirely new element will we have to dream up just to prove we are still human?
That's a haunting thought.
How do you outrun a mirror that learns to reflect your surprises before you even make them? It makes you wonder about that imaginary dinner party we started with, the philosopher and the stadium pop star.
Yeah.
Maybe next time we check in on them, they won't be talking about the poetry of water or the architecture of a bridge at all. Maybe they will just be sitting there in the expensive, heavy silence, desperately trying to think of the one impossible thing the machine waiting outside the door hasn't learned to mimic yet.